session today. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see some helpful tools. So welcome back and good morning. It's Thursday, November 19th, and this is day 2, the final day of our Fall Adult Education Manager meeting. For those of you that were with us yesterday, you'll remember that a couple of the key outcomes from yesterday, we revisited our annual collective challenge, our collective charge. What are we accomplishing? What are some of the big picture items we're looking at for the year? We also discussed fall programming, those challenges, solutions, and resources. You shared a lot of great input there. Thank you so much. We also promoted the upcoming professional development survey that you will see on December 1st. We outlined strategies for using volunteers remotely with programming, thanks to Rob Podlasic and Metro South. And we generated feedback on the draft student eligibility and distance learning statement. So it was a busy day. Today, we will be talking through some announcements and questions. We also have time for accountability to share our performance outcomes. We'll be talking about working with our partners and career pathway programming and IET, or integrated education and training, as well as outlining some next steps. We did send some materials in advance of the session. We sent some materials on Tuesday, November 17th from Carla Vian at Literacy Action Network. Those documents that in preparation for the meeting can also be found on the mnabe.org website under State ABE presentations. And Astrid, if you could share the link for that website, that would be helpful as well. Thank you, Astrid. We want to start off by saying, by sending a corrected message from what we said yesterday. Yesterday, we, the adult education team at the Minnesota Department of Education, we actually learned about an FAQ published by Minnesota Department of Education that states that ABE teachers are included in the 30-minute prep per day requirement. Astrid sent the file in the chat. This was a document that we had not seen before, and we were not consulted in the guidance as it was developed. However, I would just caution you or let you know that we acknowledge that, or I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that the Minnesota Department of Education, much like many other organizations, in pandemic mode is working very fast and doing a lot of urgent things all at the same time. And so it's so we understand that that these challenges happen. And so, but we want to be sure to apologize to you for any confusion on this matter. And we want to clarify our message today. So to help us clarify our message, I'm going to turn it over to Jody Versa.
All right, thanks, Brad. Good morning, everyone. Great to be back in this space with you again this morning. So I wanted to jump in here because we did talk about this question yesterday, and I guess as is normal for this moment in history, things have changed since yesterday. Our understanding and our knowledge has shifted a little since yesterday. So we absolutely acknowledge that that is confusing and frustrating, and we apologize for that. And at this point, we're going to have to sort of take it for what it is and move forward with what we know now, which is a little bit more than we knew yesterday. As you'll recall, yesterday, we told you that our understanding or our belief at that point was that this requirement at the governor level to provide teachers with an additional 30 minutes of prep time didn't apply to ABE because it referenced a statute that in general doesn't apply to ABE. Since then, as Brad mentioned, we learned about an FAQ document put out by MDE that specifically states that ABE teachers are in fact included. We believe that, and that the FAQ document is in the chat. The title of it is 11-13-20 Teacher Preparation Time Guidance. That is the FAQ document that went out from the Department of Ed. We believe that went out in the superintendent's mailing, so it was emailed out to superintendents. So your district leadership may have access to that document. So we want to say a few key messages about this. First key message. From our team here at MDE, our ABE team, we absolutely and unequivocally support teachers having an appropriate amount of prep time in order to be able to provide quality instruction. I apologize that I didn't say that yesterday when we were talking about this, and I do feel like that's a very important sort of framework to start with. We support teachers having prep time. We believe quality instruction requires sufficient prep time. Of course, what sufficient means is, of course, sort of the crux of the question and the issue we're facing right now. So that is an important key message for you to hear. A second key message is that we really believe, given what you've heard from us, given what this document says, there's still a lot of gray area here. And you, for the most part, will need to work with your district and your organization to interpret and implement the guidance. Unfortunately, even this FAQ document does not give us a practical and clear step-by-step directive on how exactly we should handle this issue in ABE. Brad, do you want to go on to the next slide? So we would like to suggest to you at this point the kind of questions that you're going to need to be thinking about and considering as you work towards understanding and interpreting what this guidance means in your context and for your teachers. So we've listed here some questions that we think you should be asking that I'm sure you are already asking, right? We need to be thinking about what is it that our teachers need in this moment, right? Our instructional staff is the key delivery method for our programming and our services. And we need to understand what do those folks need in order to do their job as well as they can in this moment. Of course, we have to think about how much prep time teachers currently have. You'll need to take a look at if your teachers are on a contract, what does the contract have to say about this issue? The union that represents your teachers may also have something to say about this issue. We think you'll have to be asking, do we have full-time teachers and how do we address this with full-time? But of course, it's not going to be the same for part-time and hourly teachers, most likely. There may have to be a different solution for part-time or hourly. And another key question we think you should be asking, we suspect that ECFE professionals, early childhood professionals, are in this moment perhaps having some of these same conversations because their teaching staff is also referenced on this document, but they have some of the same differences that we do in terms of their programming is not structured exactly the same way as K-12, just like ABE programming is not structured exactly the same way as K-12. So we encourage you to check in, if you have connections to an ECFE program, connect with those folks and think maybe you can share some insight about how you're going to handle this. We do want you to note that this FAQ, this guidance document, it doesn't say it explicitly, but it appears to mainly apply to full-time teachers employed with a school district. What we know about ABE teachers is that's really a minority of our ABE teachers who are actually working a full-time job with a district. So in most cases, I think, when you're considering your instructional staff, you'll need to consider this guidance as a sort of baseline starting point, but there will need to be some additional consideration put in, to the fact that these are ABE teachers, not K-12 teachers, and many of our teachers are not working full-time. So again, just to wrap up, we apologize for what I recognize it feels like a little bit of back and forth on this issue, and that's unfortunate and frustrating, and we hear your frustration about that. We have also inquired with the leadership above us at the Department of Education to try to get some clarification on this, and perhaps there will be more of that in the future, and if so, we'll be sure to get that all out to you. I guess I will wrap up there and pass it back to you, Brad, or any of my other MDE colleagues for anything else we want to say about that.
Excellent. Thank you, Jody. And I also want to put a thank you out to Chris Dahlke down in Winona. He actually pointed out this FAQ document to us and shared it with us. So this is why I really appreciate working in our collaborative field and working together like we do. So thank you, Chris, for sharing the FAQ with us and keying us into what other parts of MDE are saying publicly. So thank you. And I do see some questions here about what does this mean for CBOs, for part-time teachers, and Jody has noted some questions to think about there. And with that, we don't have any definitive answers right now because the guidance is not clear, and we will still continue to seek in a very quick fashion, as quickly as we can, any follow-up to that. But right now, it sounds like within the Minnesota Department of Education, there are a lot of entities that have questions about this. And so we are struggling to get our answers in a timely manner. But as soon as we do, when we do, we will share them. Chris Dahlke also points out that another point to consider that with K-12 teachers, they're just swapping instructional time and prep time. And we would be sacrificing contact hours and for prep time, and that would affect the consortium's funding potentially. Whereas instructional time, that is maybe a decreased amount of instructional time that's required by a student in a year. So that is true how that would work in this case as you implement this potentially. But again, we have more questions than we do have answers at this point, and we apologize for that. So let's open it up to some additional questions. What additional questions do you have? Especially, do you have any questions from content that we shared yesterday, or about the materials like the support services conference session slides that we sent out? To ask any questions that you may have, feel free to type them in the chat or click to raise your hand or unmute yourself, and then you can unmute yourself when we call on you. We have a question from Abby about the statewide performance report. Great question. We will actually launch into that in next. Okay, I am not seeing any additional questions. No worries though, we will have time for more questions later on today. So let's talk about what Abby is getting into, and that is our statewide performance report. And this next theme is about accountability. What information helps us show our effectiveness in what we do? So let's talk about some of the basics of our statewide performance data. And this is specifically for the Minnesota adult education system. For this last year, we had nearly 30,000 participants. That's enrollees that had at least 12 hours during the 1920 year. And 59% of those individuals were enrollees. And I will say that in 1920 here, we're not talking about what the contact hours that we used for funding purposes, but we're actually talking about the full July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2020. So these numbers are affected by COVID disruptions. Of those 30,000 participants, roughly 700 had an additional period of participation. Remember, in WIOA, we have something called POPs, or periods of participation, that we use to report our data. A little bit of clarification about what POPs are. Periods of participation are each time an enrollee has 12 plus contact and or proxy hours without an exit. And an exit is any time a participant does not have any contact or proxy hours for at least 90 days in any ABE program in Minnesota. Another key point in our data is that 67% of our participants have a social security number listed in SID, which is lower than our goal of at least 70%. So we are a little low with our social security numbers. And we also heard from you that 7 out of our 41 adult education consortia paid roughly $200,000 in training costs using adult education funds. Other consortia reported that they either did not help or coordinate any training, or that the training costs were covered by other partners or other funds. So let's talk through some of our key WIOA indicators. First off is MSG, the one that we know the most about and that we're the most well-versed in. This past year, again, July to June, 37% of our POPs made measurable skill gains. Some of the ways that you can make a measurable skill gain: educational functioning level, that's with the pre and post test, or with a person exits ABE and then enters post-secondary before July 1. Another way that someone can get an MSG is by earning a diploma. This is measured typically by ABE programs, but also with Minnesota state data. Our target this year was 44%, so we were low. That is not surprising though, due to COVID-related disruptions. Our outcome last year was 43%. Our next indicator is employment, and 38% of our POPs were employed 6 months after exiting ABE. This group of POPs were not our POPs from 2019, 2020, but actually from 2018 and 2019. So this year we report data on this indicator from students a year ago. This is measured by any student in SID that has a social security number. If they were a participant and exited, then we send those numbers to DEED and they report those back to us. Our outcome last year was roughly the same, 38%. Another indicator is median earnings. And this is the median quarterly earnings for a 3-month period. And again, we use the 2018-2019 POPs. And the earnings for our students that exited that were employed was just over $6,000. And this is measured again by DEED. And it actually is a big increase a significant increase from last year. Last year, the median quarterly earnings were $5,660. And then another indicator that we have that we report to the feds is how many of our students are employed 12 months after exiting adult education. So with that, what we reported this year are our students from calendar year 2018. The 2018 POPs, 36% of them were employed 12 months after exiting ABE. And again, that's measured by DEED. And that is an increase of 2% from our students from the year before. And our final indicator is credential attainment. Credential attainment is my least favorite indicator in the WIOA indicators. It is very complicated. You can see that only 13% of our calendar year 2018 POPs actually met this credential according to our data matching. This one is earned by all of our diploma level students that earn a diploma and then enter post-secondary or employment within 6 months of exiting adult education, or those that are co-enrolled in adult education and post-secondary, those that complete post-secondary within 1 year of adult education exit. So when you mix and match all of those students, we had 13% of our cohort that actually earned that or met that credential attainment indicator. So this data is a mix of adult education program data and SID, Minnesota state data, and DEED data. And it is a significant drop from last year, and we are looking into this drop. Last year, we had 23% of our students that earned this. We're not sure if this is just because of COVID-related disruptions or if there is more to this drop. So we'll keep looking into this and investigating this decrease. So not only do we have our reports from last year, the SPR, oh, and I should also note, before I move on, I want to make sure I address Abby's question with the credential attainment, and we talk about what type of credential or what completing post-secondary, what type of credentials count. The credentials are any of the career-focused credentials that you see in SID, and you can report those. If you mark those as met, that is one way that we can report those. Another way is we get a report from Minnesota State of all of our students that are co-enrolled, how many of them completed post-secondary according to their records, meaning that they earned a credential according to the Minnesota State definition. So as we look at one other piece of material that we shared, or one other resource we shared, we now have targets, not just for measurable skill gains, but we actually have targets now for all of these indicators for the 2020-21 year. And so that you'll see our MSG target is 43% for students employed at Q2, quarter two, it's 38%. 34% of our students should be employed at Q4. And our median quarterly earnings target is 5,660. And for POPs in credential attainment, the target is 23%. So you can see those are our targets for this current year that we will be reporting in 2021. And of those, the two that we really want you to focus, or that we are kind of most or that we're farthest from, are measurable skill gains and credential attainment. And so we want to work together on trying to see how we can increase those outcomes.
Brad, this is Julie. I'm wondering if you could address two questions on the prior slides. One of them is from Karen or Nancy. Can a consortia obtain the indicators data for just their programs?
Yep, I was going to talk about that in a little bit, and we can address that now. So the indicators data for their specific consortia, we can provide consortia level data on employment at Q2, employment at Q4, and median quarterly earnings. The credential attainment indicator, we cannot provide a consortium level outcome for, because there's so much mixing and matching in terms of data that we can't actually separate those out by consortia. We just are unable to do that. And we are in the process of preparing a report that shows the consortium level outcomes for those indicators, the employment and the earnings indicators. So stay tuned for that. We will be producing that here in the next couple months.
Oh, okay. And then the second question, sorry, is if they complete a credential before they get a high school diploma, it doesn't count?
So in terms of completing a career-focused credential, that actually would count as credential attainment if they were co-enrolled with MnState while they were doing it. Because remember, this one is very convoluted. It's either they earned a diploma and then went into post-secondary or employment, or a totally separate group is those students that were co-enrolled in adult education and post-secondary, and then within a year of exiting ABE, or it could even be while they're still in ABE if they completed a post-secondary credential. So with that second group, about the co-enrolled group, you can actually earn that credential and it would count for a credential attainment indicator, even if they do not even if they earned that diploma while they were doing it or around the same time.
Thank you.
Are there additional questions, Julie?
Not that I can see.
Okay. Then, as we pull all of those pieces of data together, you can see what we reported last year for outcomes, what we reported this year for outcomes, and what our targets are for the next year on this slide. And this does get rather complicated because we're not talking about a uniform set of students here. For each indicator, it might be a different set of students that we are talking about. And so it gets a little complicated. And we will have some data tips about what to do about increasing MSGs and credential attainment here later. But before we do that, we do want to take some time for additional questions that you might have, and then we will be going into a small group, into breakouts, to really talk through the outcomes and the targets, making sure that you have a chance to document your questions that you have about the outcomes and the targets. Also, though, in your groups, we want you to talk about how you could use the data and what additional data or information would help you tell your program story. So Julie, are there any questions we should address as a large group before we go into breakouts?
We did receive one more from Abby. What do you suspect is the reason we are credentialing Native people and Latino Hispanic at lower rates?
That's a great question. I do think that that actually does correlate with national data and what we see in nationally, but I do not know the rationale for why our students who are Native or our students who are Latino or Hispanic are earning credentials through our programs, or we are able to credential them at a lower rate.
Oh, go ahead.
No,
I was just going to say it might be a good to add that to the discussions when we break out. And then there was one more question that from Tom.
One other thing I would say about that question is it's a great equity question, and we do not have a good solid answer to that at this point in time.
Okay. And then the other question is there any indication from the federal government that they're adjusting our outcome expectations given the extreme disruption of COVID?
Yep. So we are reporting the COVID related disruptions by how many students are getting that COVID pre-test indicator or the COVID exemption. We are talking about the COVID exemptions, and the feds have said that they will not hold us to targets for this year, and they're indicating that they're going to be flexible with our targets for the upcoming year as well. But they have not said definitively how they are going to treat our 2020-2021 targets. So it's somewhat an uncertain matter, but I do know that they are they are definitely understanding that COVID is affecting our outcomes, and they are willing to work with us or willing to either give us a pass, maybe even for a year on these targets. So that that story will continue to evolve.
And I think that's it for now.
Okay. Excellent. Well, then at this point, let us go into, Astrid has sent out a Google Doc link. So that is the link that you will use to document notes, just like you did yesterday. We're going to give you 10 minutes in small groups, quickly introduce yourselves, and then please start talking through these 3 questions and documenting your responses. And then we will be able to use that to provide clear, definite information and answers for you moving forward. Astrid, anything I need to do before we launch into breakouts?
No, I think we're all set. You can go to the chat box to get the link to the Google Doc, and I've also chatted in the breakout group discussion topics.
Thank you, Astrid.
Carla, are we all set?
Yep, all set.
Great, thank you. Carla, is everyone who's still in here, have they been assigned to a room?
Let's see. I don't have anyone unassigned in my list. Everyone's been assigned.
Okay. Dave and Frank, I see you're still in here. If you need assistance, just unmute and let us know. I did see there were 2 Daves, so maybe he was logged in twice and the other Dave went in.
Yeah, that can happen.
And it looks like Dwayne just joined us.
Yep, he is assigned. I mean, he's not listed as unassigned.
Okay.
If they just join, they pop it up into unassigned.
Okay.
So I've got everyone assigned right now.
Okay.
Just kind of keep an eye on that. I've had a few people chat about Brad's audio.
Audio. Yeah, I was noticing it too. Brad,
Yeah,
do you want to try to call in, Brad, while we're during the breakout here?
that's what. Yeah, Susan private chatted me, and I said, we'd talk about it during this first break.
Okay. I'll be back then. I'm gonna go through the phone call-in option.
The other thing is, I don't think the closed captioning is working right now. So I was wondering, I have not done that but I know you can go to that, the API token, and you have to copy it and start live captioning. I have not done that, but I think it works.
I haven't either. Has someone asked about it?
Abby Rosa asked about it. She said, I'm not hard of hearing, but Brad's kind of breaking up, so it might be nice. But so I don't know, no one else has.
Okay.
It, so.
I think if we're gonna try to get Brad's audio resolved, my inclination is
let it be.
Let it be. If there's not somebody that needs it, just
right.
Keep things simple.
Just because it would be kind of nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I agree.
That's what I was thinking. I have the directions to do it, and I think it works, but I'm just kind of nervous on a really big group.
Yeah.
Because I think it's just to open up closed captioning, copy the API token, you go to a place to, let's see, yeah. I'll just let it be. If it comes up again, I think we could.
Brad, is that you?
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. And talk for a second.
Talk for a little bit.
Yep. So one other thing, when we reconvene, we're just going to tackle Renata's question about program improvement.
Great.
Oh, did I miss that? I'm sorry.
No, she put it in right at the end. I don't know if you saw my chat, Brad, before you logged off, but I'm assuming I can answer that.
Yep. Sorry, I was trying to type, but I was also talking. It's hard to do multiple things simultaneously.
Yeah, totally.
So with that, I agree with what you said, that it'd be great if you could take it and also acknowledge that we don't have an answer for that yet.
Yeah.
However, just note that we did cancel program improvement for this year. Kind of acknowledge that, and that we are definitely going to be very flexible. We're going to be flexible with programs through over this next year as well.
Yeah, I can give our general message of like, we never intend program improvement to be punitive. We don't use it that way. But we use it as a way to make sure that we're all on the same page and make sure as a state, we're reaching towards the expectations that the federal Department of Ed puts on us. Blah, blah, blah.
Can I interrupt for just
I hope you had a great discussion, probably a little short, but hopefully a great discussion. As we come back together, I want to remind you to turn your video off again. You do need to turn your video off every time we reconvene. And if you're not muted, make sure to mute yourself. Okay. As we come back together, one question that we wanted to address for everybody had to do with program improvement. Jody.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So good question about, are we going to run program improvement in the upcoming year based on this year's results? The short answer is we haven't made that decision yet. The somewhat longer answer is we did not run a program improvement process this year based on last year's results because of just the state of the world right now and everything that all of us have got on our plates. And that is certainly a possibility that we could make that decision again for next year, but I think we'll wait a little longer before tackling that particular issue. And also just want to put out to everybody that program improvement from our perspective of our state team is not intended to be punitive. And we have no interest in sort of getting programs in trouble or pointing out failure. But the intention of program improvement is to make sure that across our statewide system, we have some shared understanding and knowledge of how we need to work together to try to reach the expectations put on us by the federal Department of Education. So, so if we decide to run program improvement, it will be very much in that, within that framework, and we'll be sure, to make it as supportive and productive as we can. So I would say don't lose any sleep over it at this point, definitely.
Thank you, Jody. And I completely agree with that sentiment and that guidance. So as we come back together, I saw that there was some questions about the confusion with credential attainment indicator. And I will say that you're not the only one that's confused about credential attainment. And that one is very confusing even for me. And it is the biggest headache in our data reporting. So I'm going to go back to that slide briefly. Okay, so here we have the credential attainment indicator. And remember, this indicator has two different cohorts. First, there is the diploma ready students, and that is students at levels 5 and 6 in particular. The second group are the students that are co-enrolled in adult education and post-secondary. So, and we have to mix those two together in our ultimate report. But first, let's talk about that first cohort within this indicator. So every diploma-ready student, so those at levels 5 and 6 that do not already have a diploma, we have to track them for two things. One, did they earn a diploma? And then if they did earn a diploma, did they either enroll in post-secondary education or training, or were they employed? If the answer is yes, the student earned a diploma, and yes, they went to post-secondary, they count as a hit, as a success. If the student earned a diploma and went on to employment, again, that counts as a success. If the student just earned a diploma, that does not count as a success as credential attainment, but it would count as an MSG, measurable skill gain. If the student did not earn a diploma and went into employment, that would not count as a credential attainment outcome, but it would count under employment, either Q2, Q4, or both. Now, with that second group, the co-enrolled group, we actually take a look. We have Minnesota State do a data match and say how many of our students in adult education also were co-enrolled in post-secondary. So they look at those enrollment dates and they find any matches for students that were co-enrolled between ABE and post-secondary. And then of that group that is co-enrolled, we then look to see within a year of them exiting adult education, did they earn a post-secondary credential during that time, from the time that they were co-enrolled to the time of 1 year after their adult education exit. So hopefully that helps address this credential attainment indicator. As you can see, it is very convoluted and very messy. And that is why it's honestly, it's a struggle for me. What do the feds actually gain from this? Because it's hard to really show improvement in this area when it's such a mix and match indicator. I see we have some questions here from one question from Laura. What if they entered post-secondary education but did not complete the semester or quarter? Does that still count? Yes. So if in that first part, earn a diploma and then enter post-secondary, that would count as a success if they entered post-secondary education. They do not actually have to complete a semester or quarter. They just have to enroll in this case for this indicator, or for that part of that indicator. And then the other question is, what if they entered employment and then left? That still would count as a success if that student had a job from the time that they exited to over the next 6 months. At any point in time, if they had a job, that would count as a success. And Tracy, without a Social Security number, this would be impossible to track. That is also correct for the employment section. The post-secondary side, they are able to do other types of tracking where they use other types of data, but for the employment part of this indicator, they can only use Social Security number. And then Caroline asks that this doesn't then cover those learners who enter a WIOA certified credential. So overall, it depends. It may or may not. If a student is co-enrolled with post-secondary and ABE, and then they complete post-secondary according to the definition of MnSTATE, and maybe that is a WIOA certified credential, then yes, it would count. But we also know that there are some WIOA certified credentials that don't count. On the other side, if a student is in an IET and they earn that WIOA certified credential, then it does count as a measurable skill gain, not necessarily as a credential attainment indicator. At least it didn't for this year. We're looking into seeing if we can count that in the future in our data matching purposes with Minnesota State. We also have Teresa saying that she's not clear on the definition of POP. With that, periods of participation, that is basically, I can go back to that slide quick. Periods of participation is any time we have a participant period without an exit. So remember, we talked about this a while back, and for more information on this, we also encourage you to check out the Accountability 101 information. We do have some additional information about that and some past information we've shared about our WIOA trainings if you go to State AB presentations. POPs, or periods of participation, is each participant period without an exit. So one participant could have multiple periods of participation. Say a student participates in your program from July till September, and then they take a break for 3 months, and then they come back and they participate again and have another 20 plus or 12 plus hours. Then that's that would be one participant, but they would technically count as 2 POPs. So I'm going to move on for the sake of time. Thank you for those questions, and I appreciate all of the kind of curiosity about the data. I know we don't talk about it all the time, the nuances here. So now we have a little bit of a quiz for you. Please enter in the chat. How many or how much are our statewide contact hours down? And I'm talking about contact and proxy hours. How much do you think they are down this year compared to the same time last year? And the answer should be in a percent. Seeing some good responses here. 50% is coming up quite a bit, 30%, 25%, 60%. Okay. Great guesses. Patrick, I'm curious about your question, or about your response there. The answer is 61%. Contact and proxy hours are down 61% from the same time last year. And obviously this has a lot to do with the COVID effect. Great guesses out there. So this is a great chance for you to kind of compare your data right now. How much are you down compared to last year? Are you down? Are you up? That's great if you're like Todd Levin, who's saying increased contact hours. Where are you talking about a decrease? So think about, you can compare yourself now to the state average. The state average is 61%. So you can kind of now see how you compare to the rest or to the statewide average. An important note to talk about here, please continue to record countable contact hours. Even though the contact hours for this current period, May 1st, 2020 to April 30th, 2021, will not be used to distribute funding, it is still important for you to enter those countable hours in SID completely and accurately, because they can be used at your level to figure out when students can be tested or to figure out maybe some things for you to report out at your end. But also on our end, we need to, that helps us in terms of advocacy at the state legislature for increased funding, reporting to the federal Department of Education, as well as raising awareness with our community and partners. Another question for you to enter in the chat: what would you guess overall, what percentage of our participants in Minnesota adult education are low income? What percent would you guess of our participants in Minnesota adult education are low income? Seeing some great guesses here, very high guesses, higher than our decreased guesses. What is actually documented in SID is that 34% of our participants are documented in SID or identified in SID as low income. I agree with you, Karen, that number seems very low. Like you're saying, Susan, this number really seems to be underreported or undercounted. We believe a lot of these barriers to employment are underreported, and yet we also acknowledge they are challenging to collect from students. And I think they're especially challenging in a distance learning environment. However, I think we need to, or I'm hoping that we can find ways to accurately collect this information in a secure, safe, respectful way, so that we're explaining these barriers of employment, barriers to employment to students and getting as accurate as possible information. A lot of these barriers, maybe it's helpful to ask for this via interview in a conversation instead of just on a form, but we encourage you to take a look at those barriers to employment and take a look at your own numbers and what with your students. So some key data recommendations for you going forward. Please make sure to clean up your staff list. We have many staff that are, even though they've left adult education maybe years ago, they're still attached to classes or programming. And so they still count as a current staff member. Please make sure that your staff lists are up to date and that staff that have left are no longer listed as active or connected with currently active classes. We also hope that you can try to get more accurate Social Security numbers from students, even with distance education students. Also hoping that you can clearly explain and ask students in a respectful way about barriers to employment. We also hope that you can document when students are earning those career-focused credentials and document that in SID. Overall, what we're hoping is that you can collect the information to help you appropriately tell the full story of your program, of your work, and of our statewide system, as well as your students. So we want to make sure that we're able to tell our story accurately as best as possible. We know in this time that there's so much going on and that it's really hard to focus on these data recommendations when you're trying to figure out what the best model of programming is. However, we also need to make sure that we're collecting information accurately as we go forward. And this is where our support professionals are so important. So let's talk as well about tests. So we have been telling you a little bit, we've been telling you before that we bought at the state level some computer-based TABE and computer-based CASAS to distribute to Minnesota adult education programs. And that was through Southwest ABE, our training provider for state assessments. The tests that we purchased are CASAS Goals and CASAS Life and Work, Enhanced E-Tests, and TABE Online 11 and 12. If you are one of the many consortia that requested these tests, Please make sure that your staff have completed the required training, especially training on administering computer-based tests and remote tests. And also make sure that you have set up your online accounts for CASAS and or TABE. We had you fill out that survey in September, and 33 of the 39 consortia chose to receive computer-based tests. And this month we started the distribution round 1, all to 33 consortia that have applied. So those tests are being distributed during this time by Southwest ABE and the test vendors. And we're giving out 50% of the tests, about 13,000 tests during this time. And then we're giving the remaining 12 to 13,000 tests in round 2, starting in winter, spring of 21. Southwest ABE and the Minnesota Department of Education will send out an email when we're launching round 2. And the round 2 will go differently than before. Round 2 will actually be by local programs upon request. We can send out computer-based tests. The first round was based on an algorithm or based on how many tests that you had given in the past year. And so we prorated your tests that way. But round 2 will be by request, amounts and types of tests. As you look at those computer-based tests, I know many of you are thinking about remote testing. However, we also know that remote testing has been a big challenge. It's not been the success that we had hoped it would be because of student devices or student internet access or staff and student technical issues or problems that arise. So in the chat, I'm hoping that some of you can give some ideas. How can we address remote testing challenges? Do you have any ideas for us or that you can do locally to address these remote testing challenges? Any successes you've had with remote testing? Please share them in the chat. I do see that we have a question about what % of Minnesota programs are doing remote CASAS or TABE testing. And overall, we have very few programs in the state that are fully running remote CASAS and remote TABE testing. I will encourage you, though, that if you're curious about this, Astrid did share a link yesterday to the fall conference flyer for the Teaching and Learning Conference, and that included a recording and the materials for the Online Testing 101 section. Astrid also put a link to the flyer in the chat. But so far, we know that a small percentage of our programs are currently doing remote testing, but more and more programs will be trying this as they get their computer-based tests distributed to them. Like Marilyn Dvorak, one of the folks that has been doing remote testing, they've been successful at it, but it's taken a lot of work on their end. And it takes some experimenting and just kind of being willing to try, I know, on that end. There is a question about with CASAS, can you test more than one person at a time remotely? Any testing questions, we encourage you to direct to our test trainers and Marty Olson and or Linda Keller. Astrid, can you put Marty's email in the chat?
Yes, I'll do that, Brent.
And then, thank you, Astrid. And then Anastasia is asking, is it too late for round 1? The answer is unfortunately yes. That we are basing our initial distribution from the September results. So for those that filled out that survey and got those answers in September, we are distributing that first round of tests. But don't worry if you're not in round 1, you can participate in the spring or this winter spring in round 2, and that will be simply upon request. Okay, let's move on here. Okay, so let's go into our second round of breakouts. This one is about data and tests. We have some things that we'd like you to talk about. What have you tried with computer-based testing and remote testing? What could you do differently to get more accurate barriers to employment reported and more accurate Social Security numbers in SID from your students? And what is the story you want to share about your program? And what information or data can help you tell that story? So I'm going to turn it over to our breakouts. You'll see that we have a Google Doc here, and Astrid has shared that link to the Google Doc. We want you to take notes in that Google Doc like before, and make sure you assign a timekeeper. You'll have another 10 minutes in your group to talk through these 3 questions. Carla, do you mind sorting us into breakout groups? Thank you for that great discussion. I saw a lot of great notes being taken in the notes documents in the Google Doc. It's been a lot of information right now, and this is kind of the densest part of the day or of our manager meeting. So at this point, we would like to encourage you to take a little break. Please do not log out of Zoom during this time. Stay in the session, but just make sure you're on mute and your video is off during this time, and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Thanks, everybody. Going to turn it over to Julie Dinkow to talk about WIOA and our partners. Julie.
Thank you, Brad. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, you sound great.
All righty. Good morning, everyone, and I hope you grabbed your coffee or your tea because we're entering the wonderful world of WIOA. And because we've had some changes in ABE managers this past year, and there seem to be some new individuals that are entering the field, I want to ground us a little in what WIOA is and provide a little foundational knowledge and background for those individuals. So WIOA is our federal adult basic education legislation. It stands for Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And this is the federal act that includes the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, commonly known as AFLA. And that's the act which provides the federal funds for adult education. AFLA is only one program that is part of several publicly funded programs that create a workforce development system. So this is a national network of federal, state, regional, local agencies, and community-based organizations that provide a range of services from employment, education, training, and related services, and all types of supports that are designed to help job seekers secure good jobs while providing businesses with the skilled workers they need to compete in a global economy. So it's really twofold. We focus in adult education mostly on preparing the worker, but there are other entities that under WIOA that are very focused on working with the employer. So with that, could you go to the next slide, Brad? Thank you. So each state must submit a WIOA state plan on how this publicly funded workforce development system will meet their goals. And there's a link in the chat to Minnesota's current state plan. So I don't expect you to read all 554 pages of it. However, there are some sections that you might find helpful in reading and informative, especially around the population data. So on this slide are the goals that the Governor's Workforce Development Board, local workforce development leaders, and the public established in 2016. They're huge goals, and there's no way that this would be accomplished in 4 years. So in 2020, the board adopted them again. So these are the two goals that our state has in their state plan. And with the first goal, I want to just emphasize the last piece on disconnected youth. When WIOA was authorized in 2014, there was a change in how the funding was distributed to the youth program, which is one of our partners. And the majority of the funding now goes to youth who are out of school. It used to go to youth that were still in school, yet disengaged. So now it goes to youth who are out of school. And adult basic education serves a number of those youth. The second piece is really about helping employers become more inclusive in their hiring. And there are ABE programs and other providers, community-based organizations that are doing a lot of work in this area, working with employers in how to create a more inclusive environment and more inclusive hiring practices. So how do these big lofty goals scale down to you in your communities and in the ABE field? Next slide, please. Thanks. So underneath the big state plan, there's the regional and local plans. And these will be due April 30th, 2021. Minnesota received an extension on these, which is good because it's going to provide us with a little more time to actually come up with some solid action steps that we can take around those goals. So Astrid, I believe, has put a link in the chat, which will bring you to more information on the regional and the local plans in the regional and local areas. It has this map and it describes some basic information about what these plans are all about. So there is a template that the Department of Employment and Economic Development, who is one of our partners, has developed for creating this local plan. It will be available shortly, hopefully by the end of December. And they are currently editing this template so that it includes questions around equity and also some questions around the coronavirus. And I'm sure it's going to be about how has this impacted some of our programming. So even though the plans are due at the end of April, I'm guessing that they'll actually have to be done by the end of March because they have to go out for public comment. And usually they do that a month in advance. So I'm telling you this because the person representing ABE in your area will be your adult basic education representative on the local board. And you can find out who that person is by going to the mnabe.org site. And there's a list or a directory of these individuals who sit on all those local boards representing adult basic education. So I would ask that you please make sure this representative is aware of the career pathway programming in the local area and any efforts you would like to have included in that plan. Communication between the board representative and the local programs in the area will be key in moving the plan from a compliance document into more of an implementation document. And I believe as you look at this map, there are some fantastic, great relationships between adult basic education and their local boards. And then there are some that are almost non-existent. So it really varies greatly across the state. But this is something that I encourage you to do. And if you're struggling, please reach out to me as far as building those partnerships. Next slide, please. So we just talked about the state plan, the regional plan, and the local plan. The local plan is due at the end of April. Now I'm going to talk about the memorandum of understanding and the infrastructure funding agreements. that are also due. In fact, the infrastructure funding agreement will be due at the end of December. So that timeline is coming up really fast. The MOUs were negotiated in June, and they were due to the Department of Employment and Economic Development on July 1st of this past year. Minnesota received an extension for the infrastructure funding agreements until the end of December. That's mostly due to leases following like a year timeline. So it didn't make sense for people to try to develop that like what would be considered in the middle of the year. So this is typically considered though one document. There is a template again for the infrastructure funding agreement. That template was sent out to the local workforce development boards, probably the director or the chief executive officer on the board. And this year they included a space for Title II or ABE contributions for you to insert. What is your financial contribution to support the infrastructure of the one stop? For many people, I'm thinking of Minneapolis, Monticello, Anoka. There's others that are co-located within their one stop. And that's a pretty easy infrastructure agreement dollar amount to put in there. Others of you are sharing assessments or providing other support. This does not have to be an actual dollar. I mean, it can be done in kind, but you have to find out what that dollar amount is if you're going to put in kind. So if your area chooses to use the template, please put the dollar amount on that template. Or next slide, please. You could use what many used the last time we negotiated the infrastructure funding agreements, and that's the career services matrix. You'll notice that Title II is listed across the top, and the all partners are required to provide part of the career services in a one-stop. And adult basic education does, mostly by the assessments that we provide to clients and learners within our communities. But you cannot just say that's our contribution. You have to put some sort of a dollar amount to that and put it on this agreement and submit it that way. So next slide, please. Are there any questions about the IFA or the MOUs? And I will say for the adult basic education representatives that sit on their local workforce development area boards, there will be a webinar supported by Gina Fortney and the Minnesota Association of Workforce Boards that I believe it's on December 8th. And it's along with Sean Bibas at DEED who will walk us through some of this information as well. But it's imperative that you really reach out to the entire workforce area to get the information you need. So I see that Meg has said, when you see that most ABE providing testing, you mean just for our learners or for our partners' clients? I think it can be preferably for your partners' clients, but it could be for all of them because adult basic education learners are considered clients of the workforce development system. And then Tom, is it up to us to contact the workforce boards about this, or will they contact us? The workforce boards will contact the adult basic education representative who sits on the board. That's the person who will receive the communication regarding this. That's the person who will facilitate getting the signatures for this as well. So that's typically how it's been done, or how it was done the previous time, and I'm assuming it's going to be done this time as well. Then I see the IFAs and MOUs are submitted regionally and not per consortium, correct? Yes, that's correct. They're submitted. I would say the one you should be paying the most attention to is your local plan. And the regional plans are broader. The local plans are the ones that we're really most involved with.
Julie, and just one clarification there, when you say a local plan, that's not a local plan like one for each consortium, but that's a local plan for each career force area.
Yes, that's, if you go, that one slide, if you go back, would you mind going back, Brian, to the area slide, the map? And the link that Astrid put in there will give you a lot more information on these. So you can tell that these are regions, and then in each region is 1 or 2 local workforce development areas. The metro area has several local region has several local areas in it. So that is a bit of that's a huge regional area. So I would focus on the local area plans then. And it's not, these are not divided up by school districts. These are divided up by counties. That's how your local workforce development boards are designated. So did I answer that question?
Yep. Thank you. And then Teresa Zingery had a question saying, from what you said, it seems like you're saying that rent paid for co-located sites with career force is sufficient for this IFA. Is that true?
That was what yes, I heard that from Sean Bibas, who's at DEED, who's been working with that, because that is a contribution to that one-stop infrastructure.
That is all of the questions, Julie.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So moving on to adult career pathways and integrated education and training. So how can we accelerate learning for students? So these are 2 models that we can use in adult education that will help with acceleration. And we are currently in a recession, and unemployed learners will need to quickly obtain new skills. And we want them to have the academic skills and the training to get employment. So I just want to read a quote from the National College Transitions Network and how they describe this, because a lot of people have a misunderstanding about what acceleration means. And I often hear adult basic education learners don't need to have their education accelerated, meaning people think it just means to go quickly. What it means is to combine training with academic skills together to move them faster through a program. So while the need for a skilled and educated workforce is increasing, too often adult education and English language programs are not connected to job training or other post-secondary education programs to help address the challenge. Few adults have time to wait to gain basic academic and English skills before they can begin workforce training. Yet, without sufficient academic and English skills required, they will not benefit from a training or be prepared to enter a career pathway. Integrated education and training is an accelerated program design combining high-quality adult education, workforce preparation, and workforce training within a career pathway design. Next slide, please. Thank you, Brad. So yesterday we talked about the draft statement. Jody had covered this regarding adult education and student eligibility and distance learning. And one piece of that was career focused and other specialized ABE programming. And so with programming like that, consortia should collaborate with other consortia staff to refer and recruit students who might benefit from the specialized programming. So it's imperative that you see the difference between, regular programming, kind of the bread and butter, the ESL, the GED that you normally have at adult basic education programming versus career-focused specialized ABE programming. Because with career-focused in these other specialized training, we are promoting that if you have the ability, that you allow learners from other consortiums and other regions to enroll in those classes. And we want you to collaborate with other consortia in your region. And looking forward for next year, remember that you have that regional transitions aid funding to do some of this work. So we realize that ACPs are not easy to build. They can be expensive, more expensive than regular programming. And we also know that it can be difficult to recruit enough learners to support a class if you're only recruiting within your region. So many programs have been able to move their career pathways or IET online. And if a learner has an interest in a certain career pathway and your program doesn't offer it, consider referring them to an online career pathway at another consortia. And what we have done is created a report in SID to help managers identify classes that will accept learners from other consortia. Next slide, please. So the new report in SID lists career focus, that's the type, career focused online classes that can be virtually attended by any Minnesota ABE student. The report was designed to help ABE programs provide more career focused options for their learners. And the next slide is an image of that report. So if you have any classes that you're operating, and I would think many of these will begin again in January. It might not work best now to put them online, but if you have programming starting in January, and it's career focused, it's online, and you're accepting learners statewide, please tag that class as such. There's a tag when you set up a class and it says career focused online statewide. Then we now have a report that managers or teachers can go into and pull this report and look at it. If they have a learner who's saying, well, I'm really interested in parapro, but we don't offer anything here. Or I'm really interested in TEAS prep, but there's nothing around in this area that I can go to. So this is designed to help provide better service to our learners. So we're going to, next slide, please. We're going to go into breakout groups, and I want to consider, we have questions here to discuss, but I want to also let people know that part of the breakout discussion is, how could you make this work? How would you set up collaborations regionally, statewide? And right now, we don't have to worry so much about the funding piece, but down the road, we may have to. So we have a few questions here that we'd just like you to discuss in your groups, and we've given you what I consider, quite a bit of time to go in depth with these questions. And then we're going to compile it, and this will help provide us at the state level to provide some guidance around this and to provide better technical assistance to people in the field trying to do this work. So,
Julie?
yep, go ahead, Brad.
Oh, sorry. We just have a couple questions, and maybe you can just let us know if there is an answer to this, or maybe this is part of the negotiation that local programs will need to make as they go forward. Do you mind if I ask you a couple questions raised in the chat?
Go right ahead. Yep.
Excellent. So one question comes from C, and she asks, how does that work for funding? Our local career force pays for a student to be enrolled in a career pathways class. Who pays for the student if they enroll in a class in a different region?
Well, that would, I mean, this is what, when we go into breakout groups, these are some of the issues that we're trying to tackle. I would think though, that would be your adult, I mean, that would be negotiated between you and the manager of the program you're referring the learner to. But
yep, that makes sense to me. Yep.
Yep. So, but that's open for, that's something you guys can discuss in your groups. Yep.
I would think that negotiation and that discussion would also answer Jill's question, because it would depend student by student. Jill asked, will the students be registered in both ABE programs then if a referral is made? What if you're working with the student on GED and they also want to take a career class, assuming in a different region? In that sense, Julie, am I correct in saying that they would be enrolled in both programs simultaneously?
Yep, I agree. And actually, Jill, that's an excellent example of how this would benefit learners. When you look at like time restraints and when classes are offered, you know, a local program can only do so much. And by opening this up, it's really providing a learner with a broader array of times to take classes and engage in that.
One other question is, have all consortia put their info or their classes on the site yet in that report?
No, they have not. I would encourage them to do so. It's really easy to do when you just it's a tag. And I don't know if Jenny's on. I saw she was on earlier, but it's a simple click of a button and the class. But remember, it has to be career focused. It has to be online. And it has to be something you would allow other learners to enroll in. And again, you could do something where they enroll in that class, but at their local area, you're providing the assistance to help them get through the class online.
Excellent. And Emily Watts asked a question that said, what about classes that have funding restrictions of service areas but could accept from other nearby consortia? So in that case, I would think that would need to be kind of negotiated or promoted across programs. And maybe if there's a way that you could add that as a note to the report, it's possible. But you can see that this is really for statewide. It doesn't allow you to necessarily create a note.
For funding restrict, I didn't quite catch the last part of that
Yeah,
question.
Emily Watts was asking if classes have funding restrictions, so they can't go too far out of they can't go outside of their service area, but maybe they could go to a nearby consortium. In that case, the report does have some limitations.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
So. Okay, Julie, I think we need to get into breakout groups.
Sounds great.
Just note, folks, originally we were hoping for 25 minutes, but because we're running a little behind, I apologize, that's my fault. We're only going to be able to give people about 15 minutes in groups.
Some of the notes people were writing, and I noticed that a lot of you seem to have questions about sort of what C was mentioning from Marshall about what if someone else is paying for it. For instance, a Pathways to Prosperity grant. And you can either go to the host of who's sponsoring that grant, because maybe they would accept a few other learners from a different region. And ask them. It might be worth asking to see if they would allow others in there. but we will continue to work on this. And maybe because the situation is different due to COVID, that it might be, and because we're in a recession, they might consider allowing anyone across the state to enroll. So that's just something to consider. And as far as the notes, again, we'll compile them, review them, and try to summarize it, and then get information back out to you. Hopefully we'll review this at the regional transitions meeting, coordinators meeting as well, and come up with some technical assistance to support you in doing this and making this type of programming work throughout the state. So thank you.
Thanks, Julie. And thanks everyone for your great ideas in the breakouts throughout the day and yesterday as well. So let's talk about next steps here. So next steps from this manager meeting, one, we're going to be sharing the recordings and various resources on mnabe.org. So you can look there for the resources, including the recordings. We also will be submitting or sending out a final statement on student eligibility and distance learning based on your after we get time to edit the statement with your feedback. And look for the professional development survey, statewide professional development survey that will be released December 1st in the MNAB Connect newsletter. We have various upcoming events for you to kind of keep in mind, and you can always look for upcoming events at atlasabe.org. But the next upcoming event is as early as 1 o'clock today for those of you that are narrative writers. So we'll see some of you back then. We will take some time for questions at the end, but I want to make sure we get some time for some closing thoughts on day 2. We know that Minnesota adult education programs, all of you as staff, you're doing outstanding work. And our performance measures only tell part of the story. We want to be able to share our students and our program successes, as well as the challenges, to tell more of the story. ABE is often seen as that forgotten educational partner or the forgotten entity, but we don't need to be invisible. We are doing outstanding work, and we should be proud of the work that we're doing. And we should be able to describe our collaborations and our contributions to our partners as well. So our food for thought for today is how can we better tell the story of Minnesota adult education with our partners? Hopefully we can continue to think about that. As we close for this session, we want to make sure that you get a chance to fill out the evaluation and then request CEUs. So the evaluation link is in the chat. And if you are wanting CEUs, there's a couple ways that you can go forward with this. Teacher CEUs will be emailed to attendees. And if you want administrator CEUs, please email Sherry Eichinger, and you can see her email here. And we will, and she will send those administrator CEUs to you via email. Thank you for a great couple of days. Thank you for all of your hard work, not just over these last couple of days, but beyond. You have been doing outstanding work and doing such tremendous innovations. And now we will continue those innovations, but we also want to make sure that you keep taking care of yourself and keep making sure that you are healthy and you are safe, as well as your staff, families, and students. Thank you so much for a wonderful session, and we look forward to seeing you in future events. And I'm going to open it up to my colleagues at the Minnesota Department of Education. What else would you like to say?
Thank you for joining us, and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. We really have a lot to learn from you all, and we really appreciate all of your input over the last couple of days. That's really valuable to us.
Thanks for joining us today, everyone.